Nothing could be further from the truth. Slavery didn't destroy the black family. Do you know that we were still getting married through slavery? Jumping the broom in secret, even under punishment of death. We were married during Reconstruction. We were married during civil rights. When do you begin to see the rise of the single-parented black female household? 1970. After they killed Dr. King, the United States government said we must neutralize the black power base. And they determined that the black power base was the black family. It was independent black skilled men and women who financed King, financed Mr. Garvey, financed Mr. Muhammad, financed SNCC and CORE, the Freedom Riders in the sit-in movement. So they said, if we want to crush the black struggle, we got to crush the black family. So guess what they did in 1970? King dies in 68. In 1970, they came into the black communities and de-industrialized our city centers.
Take a look at that sign up there. See what it says? Cash for your home. You know what that is? It's called gentrification. It's what happens when the property value of a certain area is brought down. Huh? You listening? Yeah. They bring the property value down. They can buy the land at a lower price. Then they move all the people out, raise the property value, and sell it at a profit. Now what we need to do is we need to keep everything in our neighborhood, everything, black. Black owned with black money.
In 1970, they started shutting down the factories. Remember, up until the 50s and 60s, you didn't need a college degree to get a decent job. Many of us got grandparents who worked in factories their whole life and lived better lives than we're living now with 2 and 3 degrees. They could work in their same neighborhood and everybody worked for the factory. Good retirement, pension, benefits, medical. They started shutting down the factories in 1970 and then they went into the high schools and did what? Started deindustrializing the inner city high schools. Up until 1970, you could graduate from almost any school in New York certified as a plumber, certified as an electrician, certified as a carpenter, auto body, brick mason, a welder. They took all those programs out. These are the skills that pays the bills, gentlemen. As long as you have a skill, you can always feed your family. But if all you got is college degrees, you might end up in the unemployment line. Why? Because the skills that we learn in college are not necessarily marketable to other black people. I'm a psychologist. Ain't too many black people running around looking for a psychologist to reveal all the skeletons in their closet.
Yeah, you rather talk to a white
Exactly. So they started sending us to college instead of teaching us how to work with our hands. That was the 70s. That was the economic castration of the black male. Now let's go to 1980. The CIA comes in, cocaine import agency. They drop off crack. So now the unemployed black man who has always been a breadwinner, Envy, even in slavery.
Yeah, the best way you can destroy a people, you take away their ability to reproduce themselves. You have to think, young brother.
The white European music mega companies are not interested in positive rap because the European agenda for African people is extermination. And the only music content they're going to endorse is content that sees us going to jail or going to the cemetery. So you got to recognize all this behavior is taking place within a political context that glamorizes reckless, conspicuous consumption and demoralizes revolutionary economics. I mean, let's keep in mind, in 2017, black women spent $9 billion on European hair care products, perms and weaves and stuff, right? Black men spent $4 billion on liquor and alcohol, $2 billion on Air Jordans, $1 billion on fast food. Look at this. This is not the rappers. This is us, regular black folks. So if we are irresponsible with our money as adults, why would our children be any more responsible with their money as youth?
You have to think, young brother, about your future.
Let's deal with the facts. Fact number 1. Up until 1974, homosexuality was a mental illness in American society. If you get a copy of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that's the Bible of all diagnoses, it's in there. Same-sex attraction is a mental illness. I have a copy of it. It was changed in 1974 at an annual conference of the American Psychiatric Association. And in the position paper, which I have, it clearly says that the removal of homosexuality from the diagnostic manual was not done because we have sufficient evidence to prove that this is a biologically innate personality trait. It says it. We didn't do this because we had proof that people are born this way. It was done for political reasons.
Yeah, the best way you can destroy a people, you take away their ability to reproduce themselves.
Yeah.
In my own personal opinion, what I've studied, homosexuality was deregulated so that the LGBT movement could trump the black civil rights movement as the primary non-white issue in America. And it's already happening. You look at President Obama's behavior, he's made history. He signed more laws for the LGBT community. He hasn't signed a single law for black people since he's been in office. The only issue that matters in America now, the only minority issue, is the LGBT agenda. You hear almost nothing about black folk. That was the reason it was deregulated.
Why is it that I can say the word nigger with impunity, but I can't say the word faggot? And she said, because, David, you are not gay. I said, well, Renee, I'm not a nigger either.
However, although I don't support homosexuality, I cannot hate or deride the homosexual or the lesbian, because being a therapist, I do work with homosexual and lesbians, adults as well as youth. And in my experience, my direct clinical experience, most of the African American and Latino males that I have worked with, young and old, were all victims. 9 out of every 10, there were a few exceptions, were victims of pedophilia in their early years, normally before 12.
Did you know that most constitutions in Africa were written by white scholars out of Washington, D.C.? Do you know that most of your leaders were trained by the UK and the US? You can't liberate Africa with people who've been taught to worship the way white folks do things. I'm just being honest. Coons got to go. We got too many black folks, Coon.
A black person, a white person get married. One can't understand the other person's struggle. You've seen Tim Wise, right? You've seen Reverend Wallace. You've seen white people who understand racism very well.
That doesn't mean they're going to do anything about it.
The other thing that is obviously true is they understand racism when you see things like the murder of Medgar Evers, like the murder of Martin Luther King. They understand racism just
And what
fine.
did they do about it?
They understand us gaining just fine, and that's why murder happened.
Based on what?
So the idea that somehow a white person can't understand our struggle,
I
no
could
way.
care less what they understand. I'm
No
asking
way.
you, what have they done systematically
He already
to
told
improve
you that.
the opportunities
He
of
already
white folk?
told you
He
that.
did not tell me that.
Yes, you did tell
He
tell
did
you
not
that.
tell me that.
You're going to tell me that guys like Tim Wise and Reverend Wallace don't understand
What about
race in
Tim
America?
Wise?
They don't understand race
He
in America?
articulates
They don't-
racism,
So
but what has he done to
there are no white
systematically
people that understand race in
eliminate it?
America.
You're cool.
Well, it's a fact that
Watch
you're
how
lying.
you talk
It's
to
a
me,
fact
or
that
watch
you're
how I
lying.
talk
It's
to
a
you.
fact that you're
I
lying.
understand you
To
want
say
white people.
No, everybody, 1 second. Several things I don't allow. I don't allow the N-word. I don't allow coon. We can talk to one another and disagree, but I do not use racial epithets against
And
black
that's
people.
fine, but he called me a
no,
liar.
No.
the language needs to be watched on both
Racial
sides.
epithets will not be used on this show
And that's fine.
by anybody.
But how we talk to each other needs
you
to
can
be
say
up.
whatever you want, but no racial epithets will be used on this show about black people to black people. Eugene, your question.
So, from your paradigm, from your perspective, Civil Rights Act isn't an act of white folk stepping up on behalf of black folk. Current criminal justice reform legislation moving isn't a current act of white folk stepping up on behalf of black folk. Folk that funded the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s isn't an act of white folk stepping up on behalf of black folk. I'm sorry, as an American, because I define myself as an American, an African American.
I'm sure you do.
I live in a country that moves forward together. And I say that as a Republican. We move forward together. Yes, we have individual struggle. Yes, we have struggles.
I'm not talking
yes, we
about
have.
individual.
Yes, no. Yes, we
We're
have.
talking
we
about
have
systematic
we have
bias,
systematic.
disproportionality.
We have-
Finish
indiscriminate.
it. Finish it 15 seconds. Then answer.
We have systematic struggles, and together as a country, moving forward to defeat those struggles.
Johnson talked about a whole range of issues. It led to him being the talk of black Twitter last week. And a lot of people were questioning his educational credentials. So when you see folks who question your degrees, your response?
It's because my narrative is a whole lot different from the average mainstream black scholar. I don't parrot the narrative that the American social order wants black scholars to parrot. I tell the truth. I don't scratch unless I itch, and I don't dance unless I like the music. And because they're not used to having someone with a traditional education posit non-traditional views, people will automatically start to question his credentials. How did he get this far believing what he believes in? Well, you have to play the spook who sat by the door. When I got accepted into those 3 universities, they didn't know what I believed in. They didn't know what I stood for. But as time went on, it revealed itself.
Do you respect Frederick Douglass?
Yes.
But he had a white wife.
He did.
So that's what I'm
gonna clarify.
Why is that an issue? Why is that if you put in the work and you have the history, who cares who you marry?
I already answered that question, and I told you I don't care how much work you put in. If you don't commit yourself to a black woman, ultimately you wasn't totally committed to the struggle.
Even Frederick Douglass.
Even Frederick Douglass has to be criticized, as I did on the Breakfast Club. Now it has to be put in context. He didn't marry the white woman until he was an old man, after his wife Anna Murray Douglass of 50 years, a blue-black chocolate woman through whom all my cousins were born. He was an old man when he did it, but nonetheless he did it. And yes, he has to be criticized on that, because a black man needs to be with a black woman, and it is a contradiction. I don't care how much work you think you've done for black folks to not commit yourself to a black woman.
Yeah, the best way you can destroy a people, you take away their ability to reproduce themselves. Yeah.
Thank you for watching Thoughts Camera Action. Before you go anywhere, don't forget to click subscribe.